Hello and welcome to another in-session piece. This time around we have travelled up country slightly, well from me anyway, to a venue that I've never actually fished before, and that is Naseby Reservoir. Now, as the name might suggest, it is indeed a reservoir and it is rather large, but it also holds a good head of carp as well, to over 40 pounds. So we've got a couple of nights at our disposal and we're going to be covering things that we haven't yet covered on CineCarp.tv, and that is long range, accurate fishing, hopefully successfully, but I'm going to show you the best way to fish at distance and make it as easy as what you possibly can. And the beauty with coming to somewhere like Naseby, or indeed most reservoirs, the carp in reservoirs tend to be a lot more naive as to what they are in more sort of commercial and busier day tickets. You're not looking to fish with natural baits on a reservoir like this. You're fishing with boilies, you're fishing with pellets, you want to get a big better smell out there, and you can almost fish exactly how you want to fish as an angler. And what I mean by that is you could come to a reservoir and fish at 80 yards, you could fish at 100 yards, or you could fish at 120, 150 yards. But most importantly, it is all about being able to apply that bait and your free rigs on the same spot accurately time and time again. And as you can already see, I'm out in the water and I'm starting to put some bait in, trying to get a bit of an area established. Again, there's no spots. I've had a little lead around, there isn't any spots. It's nice and flat, it's about 10 to 12 foot deep. I'm going to put a big bed of bait out there now, and hopefully as these carp pass over it, they're going to drop down and we're going to get ourselves a couple of bites. So yeah, I've got about 25 more spawns to do, and I'm going to sit back and have a bit of a chill. Now, I've started this session slightly different to how I would start a normal session, and that is purely down to where I'm fishing. And like I've already said, I'm here fishing at Naseby Reservoir. Reservoirs are predominantly featureless. The only real feature that you'll probably ever find in a reservoir is either the dam wall, or sometimes they'll have an old stream bed running through the middle. But in this case here at Naseby, even if there is an old stream bed running through the middle, it'd be well out of my reach anyway. Reservoirs are very barren, they're very featureless, and you want to make your bait the feature. Now usually I would spend a lot of time with the leading rod trying to find the best possible spot that I can find to be able to apply my bait, and as well within my range so I could bait as accurately as possible. Now, Naseby's a big water, it's 90 plus acres in size. The wind has already changed direction from the time when we got here, and it is due to pick up. So what I've done is, knowing that my maximum distance that I want to fish is around 120 to 125 yards, given the conditions that we've got coming in. So what I've done is I've gone straight in and I've clipped the leading rod up to the maximum distance that I know that I will be able to achieve during the duration of my session. Now what I mean by that is I've looked at the long range weather forecast and I've gone to a range that I know I will be able to hit even when the wind picks up, as it is due to do tomorrow. So I've clipped the rod up at 30 wraps, I've chucked it out, I've given it a little pull back, it's nice and clean, I know I can present there, and I could spend forever and a day to try and find that perfect spot. But in reality, fishing on a big reservoir like Naseby, those little sweet spots just aren't there. The most important thing when it comes to fishing a big open reservoir like this, for almost semi-wild carp so to speak, is to be able to fish and bait as accurately as possible at a range that you can achieve, because ultimately when those carp come on you, they're going to clear you out, they're going to move on to the next person, and you're going to have to bait and you're going to have to be able to bring them back. Now one thing as well that is also worth considering when you're fishing on a big reservoir like this is a majority of these fish, in fact I would go as far as to say as all of these carp, are living out in the middle of the lake right behind where I'm fishing. And talking about behind, you're probably just going to hear now there is a tractor that's decided to start working just as we have decided to start filming, but I'm going to carry on talking anyway. So yeah, the fish are going to be predominantly living behind where I'm fishing, where the average angler can fish, because that is where they feel safe. And the one thing that I see a lot of people do, you know, this isn't just fishing on reservoirs, this is fishing on sort of linear or any other day ticket lake, is they will bait at their maximum when the weather allows them, but when the weather changes, they're unable to reach their spot. And it's also very, very easy to be able to achieve great distances with the spotting setups that are available today. You've got thin braid, you've got shock leaders, you've got nice powerful rods, and a lot of people can bait there, but they can't actually get rigs there. So what you want to do is you want to make sure you're baiting an area, and I know I keep saying it, as accurately and as consistently as possible, because ultimately that is what is going to get you more bites. Now, when it comes to the fishing rods, and this is something that I've learned from fishing abroad quite a lot. Now, the European anglers, they don't have lakes that are packed full of features. They have a lot of big open reservoirs, much like Naseby here, and their sort of philosophy and theories behind carp fishing differ slightly to ours, but they have great knowledge of working out how the carp feed and how best to catch them. So what I always do, and this is something that I've learned from those guys, is I will clip 2 rods up onto the baited area, I'll spod directly over 2 of the rods, and I'll put 1 rod a rod length or so behind. And the reasoning behind this is because that rod almost acts as a bit of a marker to know when the fish are entering your spot, because 9 times out of 10 it'll be the rod behind the bait that will go before the 2 that are on the bait. And what you'll find there is if the fish do come onto your spot and you do start getting bites, if for any reason they get a little bit spooked and they push off the back of your spot, if you've got that rod sat there behind your baited area and that starts doing your extra bites, you then know that if you fish your single hook baits past your baited area, that is going to be what's going to get you more bites. So that's a brief overview on how I've started my trip, and to be honest, unless I see something somewhere else that makes me want to move, I'll carry on fishing exactly like I am now, because the way that I'm fishing, I feel and I know personally is the best way that I can possibly be fishing here at Naseby. And one thing that it is worth mentioning, well, it's a couple of things really, I've always found that reservoirs tend to do more bites in the hours of darkness. Normally the reason for that is the fish are sitting out at range and it isn't till it gets dark or into dusk. Most of the time these reservoirs are sort of dominated by match anglers as well. The fish will come in and they'll start to feed, and as well, again, a lot of reservoirs, just like Naseby, has got a massive out of bounds area, and what you generally tend to find is the fish sort of back up into these out of bounds areas during the day, and then as it comes to sort of the evening and into darkness, they push out of there and they go on the hunt for food. These rods have been out about half an hour now. I'll probably give it another hour, maybe an hour and a half, and I'll put another sort of 5 to 7 spoms out. But again, like the mix that I've already knocked up, make it absolutely full of attractions. Loads of pellets in there, so they're breaking down at different times. So if any fish are passing, like say reservoir fish are moving in big groups, they're moving fast, I want loads of smell out there, loads of scent, and I just want them to hone in on it. And the more sort of bait I can drop through the water columns as them fish are swimming by, hopefully it's going to catch their attention. And very, very soon, we might even be holding up our first Naseby carp. It's quite a refreshing change to fish a big reservoir, you know, somewhere where no matter how hard you cast, you're not going to reach the far side, or you're certainly not going to interfere with the angler either side of you. Now, I know a little bit about Naseby, a couple of my close friends have fished here before, but I've never actually wet a line in here myself. Now I do know that there is quite a sort of a large head of carp present, but as is the case with all places that you go, certainly at this time of year, you know, early spring, the fish can be anywhere, and as easy as it can be when you speak to some of your mates that have been there and they've caught loads and they've done well, they can also be pretty tricky as well at the same time. But I am told that sort of over the years the fish have progressed on and on and on, and recently it's done its very first 40 pounder. So I'm almost a firm believer that that probably isn't the only 40 pounder in it. There's probably a couple of those, but I think an achievable target for this trip, if I can walk away from here having had my first bite from the venue, first and foremost will be a major result. But if I can catch a carp over 25 pound, I will be very, very happy. Fishing where I am and the way that I am, I've got a couple of rigs here that I feel are best suited for fishing at Naseby. Now, one of the things when you're fishing distance is ultimately you want to have a rig that is as anti-tangle as possible. You're going to be chucking these out, you know, 120, 130 yards. They go for a lot in the air, and believe me, if you've got rigs that have got sort of any form of kink in it, or you've got a supple hook link material tied to a stiffer material, it just gives that rig an extra little bit to potentially tangle. So like I say, I've got 2 rigs here that I know that no matter how hard I chuck these, that these are, well, one of them is never ever going to tangle, and the other one I'd be very, very surprised if it ever did tangle. And not only that as well, they're rigs and presentations that suit the venue that I'm fishing. Now, the bottom out where I'm fishing, even though it's smooth, there is the occasional rock, as you would expect to find in a big old reservoir. These rocks are normally going to be very sharp, and the last thing that I want to be doing is laying a long hook link like I would normally use, and for that to be sort of wafting around all over the bottom, fished on a wafter presentation, potentially coming into contact with any form of sharp rock, or the hook coming into contact with any sort of stone or sort of debris that's down on the bottom of the lake. So I've got 2 lines of approach, like I say. The first one is the traditional spinner rig. Now, like I've said before, I was never a massive fan of this to start with, but let me tell you, this rig is absolutely fantastic. It's an almost chuck it anywhere rig, and it's always presented. And I know that by putting this out there with a short boom, I've probably got a 7 or an 8-inch boom, which is still relatively long for a lot of people, but it's short in comparison to what I'd normally use. I know that this is going to be as anti-tangle as possible. I've got a nice big white 16mm pop-up on there, and I know that that's going to be sitting proud of the bottom. So if any little fish sort of come into contact with a rig and sort of bat it around a bit, I know that that hook is always going to be sat proud of the bottom. And when a carp comes over it and it feeds, it's going to pick it up, and there isn't going to be any problem with the hook. And it's quite important as well there, the hook bait that I've got on is white. Now my experiences from fishing on reservoirs is white hook baits seem to be very, very good. And I think that's just down to the clarity of the water. It's very, very murky, and I think white just sticks out very, very well. Then the other presentation I've got almost semi-contradicts putting a spinner rig out, and that is a solid bag rig. Now, like I've already said, there is a lot of small fish present in here, but one thing that I'm looking to achieve is to be able to get a rig out onto the spot without any fear of it tangling. And also as well, it's all well and good chucking single hook baits out, but when you're fishing at long range, with crosswinds, with headwinds, with tailwinds, accuracy can sometimes be impaired. And I like to think that I'm pretty accurate. In fact, I would say I'm pretty accurate, but fishing on big places like this, when you're trying to fish at distance, and like I say, the wind picks up and you've got varying different bows in your line, until you start getting bites over that baited area, you don't know exactly how tight you are. Now, by starting off with a couple of solid bags out of there, it gives me sort of a couple of indicators. First and foremost, if I get a pickup off of this and it's a bream, I know that the bream are visiting the spot, they're eating the pellets, they're eating the bait that I put out there, and it sort of shows me that I need to top back up the area. And inside this solid bag as well, I can inject it with either a goo or another liquid to add maximum attraction around this bag. And when you are building a spot up and you're regularly casting these solid bags, you'd actually be surprised that over the course of time, you can actually get quite a bit of bait out inside these small solid bags. And like I've already mentioned as well, it's a presentation that I know is not going to tangle. How I lay that rig inside that solid PVA bag is exactly how it is going to look when the bag mounts out there. And again, much like with the spinner being popped up off the bottom, I've just got a bright yellow hook bait in here that's popped up ever so slightly, so when that bag mounts, the hook bait's going to sort of rise above the pellet. The first thing that the carp are going to come into contact with is going to be that little yellow pop-up. So there you go, the two lines of presentation I've gone in with, but most importantly, these rigs are best suited for the situation that I'm in, and I'm confident in both of them, and I don't see any reason why one of these isn't going to do us a carp. The rods have been out about 4 or 5 hours now, and since I first put them out, I've topped up twice, both times with 10 spoms over the top, so there's a fair bit of bait out there now. But much like I thought, to be honest with you, daytime bites are probably going to be pretty much non-existent from this part of the lake that I'm fishing now. I've just taken a walk up the top end just to sort of pass a bit of the time and to have a little look, and it is quite evident that there's a lot of fish sort of up in the very far out of bounds, which again, like I've already said, I sort of expected them to be up there in the day, and then hopefully through the hours of darkness they push back down. One of my mates actually fished here recently, and he said to me a similar sort of thing. He had nothing through the day, and then as soon as it got to sort of an hour after dark, he'd put his big dumper bait out about sort of 4:30, he started getting bites. And I'm kind of hoping that's what's going to happen tonight, really, because it'd be really nice to get a couple of fish, certainly come into a place that I've never fished before, and ultimately fishing out long range, you know, you get a bite, the fish can run anywhere. There's nothing that they can come into contact with, and it'll be really nice to hook into one of these Naseby carp. But as it stands at the minute, another plus side as well is the two solid bags that I've got out there. Neither of those have been picked up by smaller fish. I did sort of semi-expect maybe to get a bite off of a bream with them being small hook baits, but they haven't, which again is a very, very good indicator to let me know that the bait that I'm putting out there, there's probably, bar a few roach taking a bit of the pellets away, a lot of that bait is still out there, which is good, because whilst it's quiet like it is now, the more bait that I can keep trickling in means the more bait I've got in the area for when the fish turn up, and hopefully it keeps them there for longer. So I'm going to give them till about 4-ish, I reckon, so another couple of hours. I'm going to redo them, back out on the money, half a bucket of bait straight over the top, and then there isn't really a lot more you can do. Just hope and pray that they turn up and they decide to have a little feed. Well, it's drawing towards evening now, so I'm just getting a few spare solid bags tied ready for the night. That's another thing that's well worth noting. If you are fishing with solid bags, it's always worth having a couple on rotation, because if you miscast or you get a bite, there's nothing worse than sitting back in your bivvy with wet hands trying to dry everything out to then go and have to tie another solid PVA bag. I always have sort of 3 or 4 ready, as well as the couple of 3 that I've got out on the rods. Now, I'm going to tie this bag up, and one thing that I never really see a lot of people talk about is lead placement in a solid bag, because it is very, very important. You know, depending on where that lead is how that bag will fly, and you can place the lead inside the bag for various different situations. The fishing here at Naseby, I'm trying to achieve sort of maximum distance with the bags. I want them to fly true, I want them to fly straight, and ultimately I want them to hit the clip first time every time, because I don't want to be having to bring them back in and keep retying them, because as I'm sure you all know, fishing at range can be tricky at the best of times. So I'm placing the lead in the middle, but towards the bottom of the PVA bag. Now this is very, very important. The reason why you want the lead central is so the bag is weighted equally around the lead. Now what this will do in turn is, as soon as you made the cast, the bag will straighten up very, very quickly. There'll be no wobble, and therefore it will be achieving maximum distance. Now some people like to fish the lead up towards the side of the PVA bag. Now this is a very, very good way of fishing a solid PVA bag. And I know my mate Rob, he's almost famous for fishing the flatbed style solid bags, as he likes to call them. And basically what happens is when you chuck these out, the lead's obviously the heaviest part of the bag, that sinks first, and then all your pellet and your hook bait is sat nice and proud. But I found this to be very, very good for sort of short to medium range. And as well, I know quite a few people that place their lead in top of the solid PVA bag. And again, this is a very, very good method, but it isn't the best for when it comes to casting extreme distances, because the lead is trying to overtake the pellet, in turn everything tumbles. So what I'm doing now is I'm just tying the bag up. Now it's a little bit fiddly, because like I've already mentioned, when you tie a solid bag, how this rig is laid in here is exactly how it is going to look when it mounts. So I like to put the hook bait itself right at the bottom of the bag with the hook point facing down. I don't want the hook point to face up, and the reason why I don't, I will explain in just a second. I sort of leave the hook link running up the side of the PVA bag like so, grab a small pinch of pellets, and then I just trickle them into the bag, and what that then does is it holds that hook bait in place. So I now know that no matter how much I mess around with this solid bag, that is going to stay firmly in place. And all I'm doing is I'm just going to add another little pinch of pellets in there as well, just enough to give me sort of 1.5 centimetres, maybe 2 centimetres above the hook bait itself. And then what I'm doing, nice and centrally, I'm just dropping the lead in and almost giving it a couple of little pats down, and that then sets that lead nice and firmly in place. Now what you'll see is the hook link will actually be up the side of the lead, but what you've got to remember is when this solid PVA bag goes out, it lands on the bottom and it starts to mount. You've got the lead, and then a couple of centimetres in front of it, you'll have the hook bait. But because the hook bait's buoyant, it's going to sit up above the pellets. When the fish comes down, it has no clue how long that rig is. And what you generally tend to find with solid PVA bags is you get very, very good hook holds. And the reason that I think for this is because as the fish comes over it and it sucks the whole lot in, the rig, say 6 or 7 inches. Again, I do like to use a fairly long rig when it comes to using a solid bag. They suck the whole lot in. The rig's gone right back in the fish's mouth. As they turn, they feel the weight of the lead, and they're nailed every single time. And like I say, provided that hook link isn't wrapped around the lead, you know when this mounts, it's going to be as it was when it went out. So the lead is now nestled in place, dead centre of the bag. And the way to do this, that I like to do it, is most bags come with a seam up either side where they're made, and all I do is I just line that up with the central part of the lead, so I know that the lead is sitting proud in the middle of the bag. And then I just fill the bag, again about 1.5 centimetres, 2 centimetres above the lead. A lot of people, they like to load them up with pellets. They make really long PVA bags. These are obviously good if you're dropping them from a boat or you're fishing short range, but to achieve maximum distance, I like to make them as small as what I possibly can. And then when I got the pellet in there like so, making sure that your lead core is coming up nice and central out the bag, then it's just a case of working your fingers around the bag and pulling it as tight as possible. And believe me, you can be quite hard with these PVA bags. You know, they do have an element of stretch to them, and provided they stay nice and dry and they don't get damp, you can actually really, really work them hard to the point where you can create a solid bag. And it's also worth mentioning now that the pellet mix you want to use has to be as small as possible. So I've got dust in here, I've got 1mm pellets, 2.3mm pellets, and I've got a few 4 and 6mm pellets in here as well. If you've got a nice small pellet mix, it's going to make the bags as tight as possible. And then all I'm doing is grabbing it between my thumb and my finger. I'm giving it one full twist like so, And then this is the trickier part, bit of fingers and thumbs, pulling off a fair length of PVA tape. You don't want to leave yourself too shorter ends to work with. And then I'm just wrapping that around the bag 5 or 6 times, biting it off like so. And then all I'm doing to finish this off is a double overhand knot. Now, you can as well, if you want, use a sort of solid bag stem, they're called. And what that does is it almost makes the lead look like it's a bit of a lollipop. So if you're not happy with sort of pushing it down, twisting it and tying them off, you can in turn lick and stick them. Both methods are really, really good. Lick and stick obviously works better if you're looking to sort of do a bit of speed fishing, but here we're nice and chilled. Trim the ends off like so. Again, this is another bit that multiple times I've cut through the leader. Don't want to do that. Trim that top end off there, trim that top end off there. And then all you're doing then is going down into each corners. And obviously one of these corners has got the hook bait in, one hasn't. I always like to work with the one with the hook bait in first, more so because you've got a little bit more give on the PVA and a little bit more give on the hook bait. And the last thing you want to be doing is pushing that in and splitting the hook bait. And once you've pushed that in, simple case of licking and sticking the corner in, holding it down for a couple of seconds, round onto the other side, exactly the same, giving it a little push in, lick and stick, tiny little bit of saliva, you don't need a lot. Hold that down for a couple of 3 seconds, and there you go. A rock hard, solid bag, ready to chuck to the moon. Well, not quite.